Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Hope everyone's doing well. I am so thrilled today to be speaking with Arno Bornkamp, professor of saxophone at the Conservatory of Amsterdam since 1995. Is that correct?
Yeah.
95. Recorded dozens of CDs, both solo and with Aurelia Quartet and in other groups, and plays with the Concertgebouw Orchestra and others around Europe. So I'm so pleased to be speaking today with Arno Bornkamp.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a big honor. Thank you very much, Nathan.
My pleasure. And so I think in the US, we hear a lot your name pronounced one of two ways, Arno Bornkamp or Arno Bornkamp. Would you care to correct the record for everybody?
Yeah, that's good. Arno Bornkamp.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Before we get going on the questions that were submitted, would you like to give any more information on your background?
Yeah, that's good. I'm coming from, well, actually, a family which had interest in music, but there were no people playing an instrument in my family. So I was kind of the only one. And actually, my mother was encouraging me to go to the music school. And after as a kid, it's always a little bit difficult to get motivation. And the clarinet, which I played from my 10th, did not really inspire me very much. Although, actually now I'm super happy that I played it and that I got a glimpse of Mozart and, playing Dixieland in the school band and stuff. But then turning 18, I knew that my real voice was the saxophone, and I got one for my 18th birthday. Also, my high school final exam. I asked for a tenor saxophone. Could you please give me a tenor saxophone? I asked my parents because I loved John Coltrane, Stan Getz, Dexter Gordon especially, and I found something there which I could think about having the clarinet as kind of a pre-education. Doesn't sound very respectful to the clarinet, but at least it was like that. And then I dived into the saxophone, but only as an amateur. And maybe 1 year later, I started to feel aspirations to maybe try to become a jazz musician. And yeah, very shyly did an entrance exam in the Amsterdam Conservatory and was accepted for the preliminary class. And only then I discovered that the saxophone also had a classical repertoire. I did not know at all. I was not aware of that. It was also, you have to imagine 1979 in Holland. The saxophone was a very young instrument in the classical musical world, and was not really, in the old day music life that we heard a saxophone or that there were saxophone players around. And maybe I was also really ignorant. I was also really ignorant. I might have heard it, but not even have recognized the sound, because the saxophone was a jazz instrument for me. Mm-hmm. So that is actually my background, basically. But we listened to classical music in my household, in my family. My father was a classical music lover. He was reading the Gramophone, the great magazine for classical music from England. He had a lot of records. Of course, at the time were still long play records. So he was a real music lover, classical music lover. But what was never really something that would result in some career for me. I was never thinking about that. Mm-hmm. So only via a strange way I went into the conservatory, and then I found out that to become a jazz musician or to get jazz education was not yet really possible. So then I entered the classical saxophone class as a preliminary year student. at Bogart, was teaching at the time. And only then I discovered classical saxophone repertoire in the group lessons that Bogart was organizing. And I have to say, then I really fell in love with, yeah, what my instrument could do even more than what I thought it was doing. And also maybe I kind of sensed that that was maybe a better thing for me to do than going for a jazz education.
Mhm.
So yeah, then kind of smoothly I went into classical saxophone, and yeah, I never went out of it anymore.
Yeah, and so then from there you went to France, correct? For studies later?
Yeah. Well, first I did a study in Amsterdam. I
Mhm.
started in 1979, preliminary class. Then we had 5 year bachelor. What was not called bachelor yet because we didn't have the American system. But and then a 1 year concert diploma. So I finished in 1986, and that was actually a full education. I could have kept it like that, but I fell during my study. I fell in love with the French saxophone style, especially Daniel Defayet, but also Londex and other people. And I wanted to understand more about the particular sound of Defayet and the way that he was, the culture especially also. And then I wanted to see how that related to the general culture in France and especially in Paris. Uh, Actually, my parents, my father was also a Francophile. He really loved the French culture. So we went there quite often on holidays. And that felt close to me. Also, I spoke French already. So it was not a very strange thing for me to go there once a month and to have lessons with Defayet, and then to go to the museums, to go to theater plays in France, and to see how part of our culture, the French saxophone culture is a very important part of the saxophone culture in general. How that related to the life in Paris, how the people were, how the language is spoken, all these things mattered, I think. And so that's what I did then. Yes, true.
Yeah, and so you studied. Um, did you study formally at either conservatoire or just okay?
I won a grant.
Okay.
They were giving grants to young people who wanted to study abroad,
Hmm.
and I played for it. And I remember I played the Crescent Sonata with Ivo, and yeah, I think there was no doubt for the jury that the money would be spent well. And so then I went for a year to Paris, but I didn't go. I didn't live there. I went every month, like 3 or 4 days, to get the lessons, and then I went back because already I was teaching myself in the east of Holland in a conservatory in Enschede, and I had my quartet already working a lot. So, and also I had a girlfriend, and I didn't want to let that leave that all behind. I wanted to yeah, I was kind of um, keeping my life in Amsterdam going, but getting information, important information from Paris, actually.
Of course. Great. Well, I think that's a kind of a perfect lead into the first question, which is, you know, now that we know your background in studies, like what aspects of your pedagogy do you feel are most important for your students to learn and to practice, to put into practice?
I think that I'm quite a traditional teacher, actually, in the sense that I like to build up the saxophone playing from the beginning.
Mhm.
Um, Even if the people already have a good level, which nowadays is very Yeah, it's very what is the word for that? You not
Common
useful.
or usual? Yeah.
The level has been growing so much that in entrance exams you get very good people basically. But it doesn't mean that I don't want to work on fundamentals in the beginning, and I don't want to work on the musicality, training the musicality with like studies, Close, Fairling, of course, and Dashak and Berbiguier, all these things, scales, all these basic things I want to work on. I don't have someone, for the technical part of the study. Like sometimes teachers have an assistant doing that, but I want to do that myself because I find it very important, because what you do in the fundamentals is already very clear, opening up to other things that you're doing later. And I don't want to miss anything of that. So and I want to be there when they play that in front of me. It's very important. Um, so and then I'm maybe what mostly characterizes me is that I'm trying to make a format for every student. It's not that I do every student the same thing, but I try to react on what the student needs, and then I kind of adapt the program to the student, and also the way of playing, and also the way they work on the technique. I adapt that to the student. So it's kind of um, custom made.
Mm-hmm.
And that I find that very important, because nobody is the same, and we all have our own ways to understand the how music works and how to build up playing. And so maybe that is what characterizes me the most, is that I try to find something for everyone, something
Right.
special.
And so um, you mentioned that, no matter how advanced somebody is when they enter, you want to work on fundamentals with them. Do you take that same approach to repertoire as well? So
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah, of course. But when people enter the school by playing Denisov Sonata, it's not necessarily that the first piece I do with them is the aria by Bozza, but you know, but it might be necessary at some point, because if you play the Denisov Sonata, it doesn't mean that you can sing on your instrument. And so if I find it necessary that they learn that, um, then I want to work on these things also. So I try to cover the whole ground. It's like yeah, it's actually also really, it's really a passion of mine to to share what I feel is important with all kinds of music,
Mhm.
and that is for transcriptions and for 19th century original music like de Merseman or Arban or whatever, and for the music from the interbellum, Hot Sonata, for instance, or the Werner Heider jazz, Sonata and Jazz,
Mhm.
or with the French repertoire, or with Dutch new saxophone music, or with contemporary French. Everything is kind of interesting for me, and it depends on the student what they want and how they want to develop, and then we can see how we can cover that ground.
Uh-huh. And so you mentioned a specific thing with, making sure that the student knows how to sing on their instrument.
That's
Um,
very important. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and I think
Otherwise, it's difficult to become a professional and do orchestral work like pictures at an exhibition or Rachmaninoff symphonic dances.
right. And so um, I think most of us who know you're playing would agree that that's one of the most readily identifiable values that you communicate when you perform, is you have this singing quality to your playing.
Mhm.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to dig just a little bit deeper on that and ask what how do you address that with your students? How do you, I mean, obviously through choosing specific repertoire to address those things, but at the fundamental level, what are you doing with them?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Because singing on an instrument is not always um, something that comes natural. Sometimes I hear people sing just when they are walking through the corridor and they sing. And then when they take their instrument, suddenly that whole process is different
Mm.
because the instrument is in their hands. Suddenly they watch music, they see, and then they have a reflex which is connected with a finger and not necessarily with their air. And of course, the idea of singing is that you can have an airflow which is continuous, and that finally is the identification of how you sing the melody in your head. But very often with people, the instrument is in between, and it's of course it's a very complicated machine that we also have to know how to use that. But there can be a problem, and yeah, sometimes then I try to think a bit out of the box. And for instance, what I'm doing is if people have a bit of trouble with the sostenuto, with the legato phrasing, then I want to get rid of this eye finger reflex that they have. And I want them to play the Felling studies, the slow ones, but then transposed so that what they see is not what they hear from themselves and what they imagine. And then I try to make them more independent of the reading and of actually also of the finger because they have to hear it and from there to play it instead of watching it. That's quite a successful way of making people think out of the box. Um, Also, sometimes I have students who have kind of like an air reflex when they put the finger. So do, just because they want to be sure that they have the note. And then I get into my instrument collection, and then I get my Swanee saxophone, which is the slide saxophone. There are no fingerings. So if they want to play melody, they should do it by sliding, and there is no finger identification.
Mm.
And that's also quite helpful and also very funny, of course. So, but of course, at some point, yeah, and another thing which is also quite interesting. What I used to do in the past was having people playing the instrument and then me standing behind and then putting the fingers on the keys and then the person blowing. Nowadays, it's not possible because of Corona. So it's really pity that this way of teaching, which of course is always also a little bit, well, tricky maybe. But I saw the picture of Fred Hemke behind you. He was also quite he used that very often. I know that.
Yeah,
But
we
it's
call that
also
the Hemke
very
hug.
helpful because then people feel how much they are connected to finger movement instead of the blowing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we at Northwestern we called that the Hemke hug. If he would, he was of course an enormous man whose presence was even bigger, and so he would wrap his arms around you and do that. So okay, so air related, right? But so what about vibrato? Because obviously we can have the same issues with vibrato in terms of within a note or some notes and not others. Can you speak on that at all?
Yeah. That is also very hard to tackle because we can explain how it works, but then and maybe then the student can imagine it, but then to do it and to feel the trust to let it go. It's like they have to trust, like it's like flying or swimming. It's like things which feel almost a magic, and then they have to do that themselves. It's very difficult. Um, yeah, well, there are tricks. Of course, you can and usually the movement is not the problem. They can do that. Although it's something to check, because sometimes people are moving the jaw back and forth instead of up and down. And of course, also the jaw movement should be incredibly small, because I think that vibrato is more a voicing thing than actually a jaw movement. But of course, it's a combination. Yeah, and for instance, what can be done is to have two notes in a loop, and then make them vibrate them without stop, so that they feel that they don't have to stop the vibrato when the notes are changing. Um, so that's kind of a motoric trick, but of course it's something that has to come with imagination. And if the people can imagine it, and also when they hear it with other people, or maybe when they record themselves, and then yeah, there should be the click. This is also, it's kind of a click. But you're right. It is what we hear very often is that people first check the note, and then so it's like a like a, a tenth of a second, and then they start the vibrato.
Yeah.
It's like these new lamps that start very slowly. Oh, that
Yeah.
can be great, of course, huh? But um, if it's all the time like that, then it becomes predictable, and it's also nice to have the sound, like the timbre immediately.
Right.
It's all
So,
about trust. It's trust. Trust is the main thing here.
and so really, it sounds like freeing up the air and the vibrato mechanism from the technique in a way, like the note to note technique, and thinking
Like,
bigger. Okay.
yeah, yeah. And of course, very important is that physically things work well. That the air support has to work well. The voicing has to work well. The imagination has to work well.
Right.
Yeah. So this is the basic situation, which has to be good.
Yeah. So, um, one of the things also that I've noticed, your some of your recent projects, and maybe not so recent, maybe over the course of your entire time playing, have involved a lot of transcription work, a lot of playing the music of other instruments. Most recently, of course, your Bach CD just came out this year. Uh, um, how has that informed your playing the music of other instruments?
Yeah. Um, as you said, it's absolutely true that it always has fascinated me. Even when I was in the preliminary class, I was already uh, going to the music shop and buying the Brahms second clarinet sonata arrangement that I actually heard on clarinet on a student concert, and I thought, "Oi, this should be played on saxophone." I didn't even know that there was a transcription, but hearing the music, the first melody, I knew I have to do this. I was like, I was a saxophone baby. Can you imagine? I already felt, "Oy, I want to play this." Later on, I could do it. Of course, it was fantastic. But so I kind of like the idea to look over the fence of the instrument and what our instrument represents, and to see if we can cover more ground, and if there is valuable music that we can play, and that maybe even we can give a contribution to, that other instruments might not have, and that if people listen to that, they might think, wow, this piece is actually great in another way also. So I have a very interesting anecdote about this. Once I made the recording, a radio recording of the Brahms sonata. That was before the CD recording. I was still a student, and then a couple of friends of mine, they were coincidentally listening to the radio broadcast. And then the day after, I saw them in school, and they said, "Very nice that you're playing yesterday night, but we came in after it was announced, and we were we were listening to your playing, and we could not figure out who was the composer, but we could hear it was you. So, I hope it's not always the case that you don't recognize the composer anymore. But yeah, of course you can be confused on a moment like that. But I think it's yeah, for me it's fabulous to do that. But I have to say that we have to be very careful with that, and that only we I think we should only yeah, do things of which we are sure that it works. And sometimes, of course, you can feel that it's tricky. And sometimes I also really think that transcriptions don't work. You know, if you have to do too many adaptations or the style is just not working. For instance, Mozart, Beethoven, sometimes Haydn, maybe it could work, but the classics from Vienna, it's absolutely doesn't work for me to hear that on saxophone.
Mhm.
And so maybe that music is too kind of, I don't know, yeah, it's also too well written for it's so much written for the instrument
Mhm.
that it doesn't have that um, general meaning. It works on the instrument, and otherwise it seems like you are intruding in a cupboard with porcelain, you know.
Yeah.
And it will easily break because the saxophone is a too fat and too powerful instrument for
Mm.
that kind of music. So I feel a bit like I feel shame when I hear that on saxophone.
Mm.
Or sometimes people play that and then they find the style, but then I think that they don't uh, um, they don't play the saxophone anymore. It's like they have transformed the instrument into something else.
Mhm.
We should still be able to represent saxophone and the voice of the instrument, and not change it into a clarinet or an oboe or a fake violin or something. You know,
Yeah.
that
Um,
is what I think.
no, that's great. And so when you play these pieces, when we were speaking just before, and I wrote you last year about the Debussy album. In fact, uh, the how when you play those pieces, how do you go about studying them? Um, how do you go about choosing them?
Good point. Debussy and Ravel, those two CDs, I worked on that simultaneously, and it took me more than 10 years to collect the repertoire.
Mhm.
And that I was kind of, I started this thinking about no, I started playing Debussy arrangement by doing the Prelude à l'après-midi d'une femme,
Mhm.
the very famous his masterpiece for orchestra from 1893, which has changed the musical world because it was the opening to contemporary music in a way, how
Mhm.
he wrote that. And it was a very interesting story. I was in the plane going to Boston for a master class, and in the plane there was on the headphones we had the radio, and one of the programs was made by James Galway, the flute player. And so he made a whole program full of music and of course a lot of his own playing. And one of the pieces which was there was the Prelude à l'après-midi d'un faune for flute and piano. And I was listening to that, and we went in. We were, we were starting to fly, and I was getting into the sky, and then and I felt I have to play this. And I was listening very carefully. Is it not going too high? Because then you have a problem, of course. But the flute can go much higher than the soprano saxophone. But that felt good. And then as soon as I was home, I bought the score for flute and piano, and I made a transcription. And a few weeks later, I played it. And I knew that piece already from listening. I kind of knew it from memory already, from the orchestra. And it was like a dream come true to be able to play that music. So beautiful. And then I start to think, oh, okay, maybe I can do also a Ravel, Ma Merlois, and maybe we can do the Six Épigraphes Antiques of Debussy, and maybe I can find other pieces of Ravel. So I start to combine stuff and made programs of Debussy and Ravel, which of course they were contemporaries of each other and always associated with each other. And year by year, I start to collect more and more pieces. Sometimes there were already transcriptions available, and a lot of them I asked arrangers around me to make them. And usually, I think I was successful finding pieces for two pianos or piano four hands, because then you have when you select the saxophone part from that, then still the piano part is very interesting and maybe even very virtuoso. Instead of having a piano piece and just leave the pinky for the saxophone. But I don't like that kind of arrangement, because then actually it's just an amputated piano piece.
Mm.
And then with the saxophone sound, I don't like that very much. And in this way, I of course also the piece that you were interested in, the Petite Suite for alto saxophone and piano. It was already an arrangement by Jun Nagao from Tokyo, and he kindly sent me that, and we could just play that. So in this way, I collected the repertoire of pieces that I thought were well adaptable for saxophone, for my playing, that I could identify myself into it. And of course, Ivo also, because the piano parts are way more important than the saxophone part in terms of the character of the pieces.
Mm.
And it was great. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned Evo. You've had a number of long-term collaborations. I mean, one with Evo. I think was your first CD the Sonatas CD, the saxophone sonatas.
It was the first solo CD. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that had to be 30 years ago, huh? Um,
We did it in 1989. Yeah, and it came
yeah.
out in 1990. Yeah, exactly.
So so you've had these long-term collaborations. How has that? I mean, that has to be a really rewarding thing about your career to have these relationships and to play pieces with your friends over the course of such a long time. Aurelia Quartet
Yeah.
as well. Can you like speak to how that has informed your playing too?
Yeah. Well, that is. Yeah, I can only say that I am privileged to be able to have had that, to have so talented people around me and playing with me, and putting so much effort in doing stuff. Especially you imagine a pianist who has a solo career, because Ivo had a solo career, but he actually also liked to practice Denisov and Schmid and the Debussy and Ravel stuff, and a lot of other things that we have done. So it's kind of that is, I feel treated by that.
Mm-hmm.
And also the way that we worked, and we always had kind of especially in the beginning, a bit of a bravura thing going on, and we also played a bit like that. I think we felt a bit like, not too serious, and just playing for the music and finding a way to amaze the people. Maybe later on we got a bit more depth, but I'm sure that in the beginning we tried to be we tried to play like a fire brigade, right? It was, very powerful and stuff. So we had a bit of that going on, I think, with the two of us. And with the quartet, that has actually been my musical home. With those people, we spent so much time together. We actually were teaching each other the music. It's like when you are a quartet and you play 3-4 times a week, and you go on tour, and it's like you dive so deep in music. We of course we also had these transcriptions of the Debussy, Ravel, and a lot of other things, and new music project with Jacob TV and stuff. And it's like, yeah, it's like you grow up together, and at the same time you teach each other things in not only in music, also in life things. The first children were born. We went to, yeah, it's kind of a life thing which was going on, and it has formed me, I think, and yeah, I'm super happy to have had that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned Jacob TV, and how did your relationship with him start? How did that collaboration begin?
It started in the relation with the quartet. We got a gig in a music, in a chamber music venue, 1998. I still remember that. And they had their 10-year anniversary, and they organized 12 concerts in that year. And in every concert, the ensemble that they invited was coupled. How do you say that?
Yeah, coupled. Yeah.
With a composer, and then the composer was writing a piece for that ensemble. And we were coupled to Jacob. We knew his name, but we didn't know his music very well. We heard maybe the string quartets or something, but we had never crossed our paths. And so we were actually quite puzzled. But yeah, for some reason we were not in contact. And then I got a telephone call from Jacob at some point, and he said, "Yeah, I wrote a piece for you. I would like to show you that, and maybe you can start working on it and stuff like that." And then yeah, he just did without asking us what we wanted or something. He just made a piece, which was pitch black. The piece with the boombox with Chet Baker on it.
Mm-hmm.
And we were super surprised because it was something that we have never had before. A piece with a soundtrack, which had to be broadcasted by a boombox. So it was all totally new for us. And also the way the collaboration went was incredibly comfortable and smooth, and based on mutual respect. And yeah, it was actually great to have this kind of this discovery from both sides, actually. And then later on, I was invited to be in a project about the turn of the century and what that meant to contemporary music, and what maybe the 21st century could bring. And in that project, I was invited also to introduce a new piece by a composer. And then I asked Jacob to write the new piece, of which I thought it could open up the window to the 21st century. And then he wrote Grab It.
Mm.
And I think it also worked a bit like opening up to the 21st century, because it was kind of a bomb that he put under the saxophone world.
Right.
Yeah, of course, is a piece that everybody knows, and everybody, maybe not everybody played, but everybody knows that piece, and maybe has their own opinion about it, but it certainly had a big impact.
Yeah, absolutely. So Pitch Black was his first piece for saxophone then.
Yeah.
Okay. And then from there on, I think, I mean, of course, your performances of it, of his music, drew a lot of attention, but also then when Connie Frigo studied with you, and then came back from Amsterdam with, and was a liaison for Jacob as well. I mean, I think that really, I mean, his pieces for a very long time now have been programmed widely in the U.S.
Yeah. Can you imagine when I played it in Montreal in this saxophone congress in 2000, which was actually kind of a coincidence that it could be played in the big hall, because actually it was a replacement for another piece which was cancelled. So I played the Grab It in front of the whole the big audience, and a lot of Americans were like, "Oi, oi, oi, what is this? You know, this is about our culture, but we are not really sure if if we like it even." Yeah, it was. Of course, it shows us like some elements of society, and especially also the American society. Then and I could feel that some people were reserved about it, and other people were like, "Yeah, this is fantastic," and other people were like, I remember seeing Professor Rousseau, and he said, "Yeah, you played it very good," he said, but he didn't say that he liked the piece. He's a wonderful man, so from a gentleman like that, is you understand that he will say something like this. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so one of the other questions that was mentioned was actually about the classical music world,
Mhm.
and differences actually between Europe and the U.S. I mean, you've played all over the world. I mean, do you have any perspectives on that, the differences or similarities?
What do you exactly mean?
Well, the question was just, have you observed any differences just in the classical music world between, the US and Europe, or are they much more merged?
Oh, it's difficult to say. We have so many. Oh, my camera is wrong. We have so many layers in the classical musical world. It's difficult to say something particular about the difference between the one and the other, because where to start,
Sure.
um, uh, from what I have experienced is that in United States, maybe the classical music world is very connected to university.
Hmm.
Um, of course, we also have conservatories. We don't call it university. Sometimes we call it university, but mostly it's kind of a conservatory situation. Um, but it's not that there's so much connected to it. It's like your education is there, and the education is like at the most 6 years, maybe even less, and then it's done. And I think in the United States, it's like you spend a lot of time in university, and you have a lot of grades to do, and you can even live on the campus and all these things. We don't have that so much. It's maybe only in a couple of situations in Europe that there are campuses where students live. So it's not so connected to the musical world that to have a university. Um, yeah, so it's what I feel is that I think that in the United States the classical music is taking place in the big cities, and that uh, on the call it countryside, you have big universities.
Mm.
And of course, there's a lot of classical music going on, but it's not always connected to what's happening in the big cities. For instance, in New York, you cannot really study classical saxophone, right? Yeah, yeah. There's maybe one school, Manhattan School,
Hmm.
but there is not like a very famous conservatory situation in New York. I don't think in San Francisco, not in Los Angeles. The big saxophone programs are in the Midwest. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
I think that's starting to change, but yet for the longest time, yes, there was the
Yeah,
Midwest.
yeah. And I have no I have no opinion about that. I think whatever is there is, if it's good, it's fine. But it's interesting to see that. And in Europe, it's like in the big cities, in Paris, in Madrid, or, there in the capitals, there is a good place to learn music, and then depends a bit on the teacher, of course. But so this is kind of logic, and I don't see that so much in the United States. It's more university connected, and when universities have interest and find a good teacher, then they can do a huge program. Eastman School of Music is a huge program, but it's in the middle of nowhere, you know, which is not disrespectfully meant, but in a way it is if you compare it with big cities like New York, Philadelphia, Boston, even, although Boston has quite a good saxophone program, I think.
Right.
But that doesn't happen so much in Europe. That we don't have that in this way.
Yeah, I see.
Does it make sense, you think, Nathan?
What's that?
Does that make sense, you think?
Yeah, no, I understand. So, one of it is interesting how the conservatories tend to be independent of a university setting in Europe compared to in the US. It's very much, even Eastman School of Music is attached to University of Rochester, or many of the most famous conservatories and music schools are still housed within a university setting.
Well, of course, there are also, I now suddenly think about an exception. It's like Chicago has the Northwestern.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Chicago.
Yeah.
And Hemke was teaching, now it's Tamer, I think, who's teaching there.
Yep, that's correct.
So that's kind of how it's going in Europe. Like a big city has something like this.
Yeah. Well, so but before we get to our last kind of plan question, I did want to also put out a call to anybody who's watching right now. If you do have a question that you would like to hear Mr. Bornkamp's opinion on, please go ahead and type it in. So in the last one was, do you have a favorite story or experience as a touring performer or musician?
That's a surprising one.
That one came in yesterday.
Okay, let me think. Famous story. Yeah, well, the story is connected to the Aurelia Quartet.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning of our career, we got into some program that we got concerts. We didn't earn a lot, but we went to Germany for concerts.
Mm-hmm.
And first was great experience, of course. And we could play our programs, and we earned a little bit, and we got a lot of maybe also like our name start to go around, and also we got experience in playing. So once we went to Freiburg in Germany, quite far from here, and it was very cold that day. Well, actually, we went in a weekend. We went on the Saturday, and then on the Sunday we had two concerts. One was in the afternoon. It was in the Freiburg town, in kind of I think it was a hall connected to a cinema. So we played the concert there. Well, it was very nice. And then in the night we had to play a little outside Freiburg. But of course it was before the time of Google Maps or whatever kind of internet thing going on. So we had to figure out how to go there. And there was actually only one way that we could get there, especially also because it was very cold, was by taxi. So we went by taxi, and we got a name of the venue. It was a church, the church Sankt Peter und Paul. I can still remember. Kapelle Sankt Peter und Paul. So we told that to to the taxi driver, and one of our Willem van Merwijk, maybe you know Willem van Merwijk, was the baritone player, and nowadays we know him as Guillermo Lago, the
Right.
composer.
Right.
He speaks German fabulously. He speaks like 6-7 languages fluently, so the German is for him is no problem. So he was talking with the taxi driver. Yeah, we have to go to the Kapelle St. Peter, blah 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 blah. The taxi driver dropped us off near a church. So we thought, oh, this is the church, and we saw church, Kirche St. Peter und Paul. So we thought, it must be the same. So we went in, and there was a man lighting the candles, and we were putting the saxophones down. We were looking, let's see how the sound is here, you know. And then but the man who was lighting the candles was not reacting on us. So we thought, this is a little bit strange. So after 5 minutes, we went up to him and said, that actually we have a concert here tonight. What? A concert? Yeah, we have a concert. No. Yeah, we have a concert in the Kapelle St. Peter und Paul. And he said, no, this is the Kirche St. Peter und Paul. The Kapelle is 20 meters further. 20 minutes walk further. Right. So, oh no. And we could not get a taxi. There was no Uber yet. There was nothing. So we had to walk to that other Kapelle. We arrived there just before 6. The concert started at 7. There was nobody. We didn't eat. So we went to the pizzeria. We took a pizza. It took very long. We wanted to have coffee. You know, all these kind of things. I make the story a bit shorter. Led to the fact that we arrived there 1 minute before 7. And they were looking outside the door. Where are these guys? You know, and we said, yeah, we couldn't find it because we went to the wrong place and blah. And we were making up the story a little bit. We didn't say that we needed coffee, of course. So, and they said, yeah, everybody is already waiting. And finally, we had to change our clothes behind a curtain, which actually was the hall. So the people were kind of not really watching how we were putting our dresses on, our suits on, but of course it was a little bit tricky, and we were already like in a kind of in a laughter mood. You can imagine it's hilarious. But finally we played the concert, and I think it was the best concert that we ever gave. We were totally in another state of mind because of all this stress and all these things and all the laughter and the laugh attacks that we had. And so I think we never played better than that because of how we felt. And then finally we did like 4 or 5 encores, and then the last one was the third movement of Français, the Sérénade comique of the quartet, and then we were making such a kind of a humoristic rubato that we could not stop laughing anymore, and we had to stop. Only Willem continued. But the funny thing is that the people understood everything, so they were also like laughing. So was the most happy concert that I can remember.
Maybe it was the pizza.
The coffee. Maybe they put 3 shots of caffeine in.
Right. Great. So we have a couple other questions that came in.
Okay.
The first one I saw is from Louis Philippe, and he asks, can you explain what? Yeah.
Nice to meet you again.
How
are you? We met in GAP, right? Yeah. For this kind I have a very bad memory, but for this kind of thing, I have a good memory.
Well, he asks, can you explain what happened in Montreal in regards to the orchestral players refusing to play the repertoire?
Yeah. Well, you already said it. That was tricky. There was a program. I set up a program. I think I was going to play Mobsters by Giel Meijering, and Claude was going to play the sequenza number 7 with orchestra. I think it's called Chemin
Yeah.
something.
4, I think.
And it was I think Otis was also on the program. Otis Murphy. I don't remember what was his piece. And I think that just the orchestra was like, yeah, it's too difficult. Maybe not enough time to prepare, or they just refused to play. And then there was a whole evening empty of there an evening concert like in the big hall there.
Mhm.
And then they asked us soloists to do something else. So I Otis, I think he played Muczynski and Klonos or something. I played Grab It. I'm not sure if Claude also played, but yeah, we kind of made a program instead of the thing. And actually was, I think for Grab It was kind of fantastic that actually I was happy to play Grab It there instead of in a small venue,
Mhm.
um, because then people could really hear it. And I think that was just a great coincidence. And it's also interesting, the day after he got a lot of commissions from people all over that had heard the performance and wanted to buy the piece.
Mhm. And so Louis Philippe asked a follow-up question. Actually, furthermore, do you believe that more simple compositions could help the saxophone thrive in a more traditional orchestral world?
Can you tell me again? Sorry.
Um, do you believe that more? He says, do you believe that more simple compositions could help the saxophone thrive more in the traditional orchestral world?
Well, what is simple? What do you
I,
mean with?
my interpretation of it in this context is maybe more traditional. Um, Louis Philippe, do you have any do you want to
Yes,
clarify?
I was reading some posts today about this, and I read that uh, maybe if the saxophone had a repertoire that was simpler for the actual orchestral players, maybe that the saxophone would be programmed more in some more traditional concerts where you would have Beethoven and Mozart and Brahms like always,
Yeah,
because I feel that what happened in Montreal might happen again and again and again, and maybe this is why we don't get as much saxophone as we would like to. It's
yeah.
just a thought.
I don't know. I think that a composer has to write what he has in his head, and he should not think about. He should make a good instrumentation. He should write good for the instrument. But if he's going to adapt to the desires of then it's like kind of a lost case, I think. In 2 years ago, I did the new piece by Guillermo Lago, the Leyendas with orchestra, and he writes music, which is maybe not so hard to play, but it sounds fantastic. So it's also a way of how to write for instrumentation is an art,
Oh, yeah.
but if composers have to reduce what they have in mind, because no, I don't think they should be able to write what they can. And you see with Adam's concerto, which is very difficult to play. It's played all over the world, So I think that doesn't really matter, but should be done in a good way.
Mm-hmm. And so,
That's a good question, actually. It's a good point, but yeah, that's my reaction on that.
yeah, and Nathan Mensink asks, you
I met
mentioned,
him.
yeah,
I can speak Dutch with him.
uh,
He can speak Dutch.
he asks, you mentioned Defaye, and then says, who are your favorite classical saxophone players to listen to now?
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I have I have a lot of admiration for, yeah, and also a big friendship for Nobuya Sogawa. And for me, I find he's my brother in music, and so that if I listen to classical saxophone, it's mainly him. Yeah.
Yeah.
but there are many good ones. But there I feel, I feel, yeah, it's my heart. I feel my heart.
Sure. Um, and then there are two more here. Um, one from Peter, and he asks,
From who?
from Peter Knoll.
I don't know.
And he asks, what recommendations do you have for learning extended technique, slap tonguing, double tongues? He said, I'm currently finishing my undergraduate degree in saxophone performance, but I have not had many opportunities to learn these techniques, and I'm now struggling with them.
Yeah. Also a very good question. I think it's maybe good to find repertoire where you can see how it is used and how it works in music, and why it actually is interesting to do it. It's interesting to see the extended techniques. If we listen to recordings of John Coltrane and Ornette Coleman and Albert Ayler and Archie Shepp, they were doing those things already in the early '60s, and then the saxophone world woke up at the end of the '60s with Denisov Sonata, uh, Rio Noda, Improvisation Number 1. Actually, that piece would be great for him to maybe, or he already played it, but there are like Flatortzunge and maybe some tremolo stuff, and there are things like not so difficult, glissando. Slap tongue is something that is more specialistic, I would say, and also it's interesting to see that in Rudy Wiedoeft was a great slapper already. In the even before 1920, he already amazed the world with his slap tongues. There's actually nothing new under the sun. Um, and actually, what is a very helpful study book is a book by Guy Lacour. It's called 12 esquisses, so 12 sketches for saxophone, and maybe even something with contemporary music. And in this book, he is presenting different ways of, putting this kind of techniques in a musical context. Sorry, and I find that extremely helpful because then the students don't look at it as something sacred. They can just feel, okay, this is something that I can just work on. I can just practice. And it's not like the mysterious morning thing, which is directly, we have to, like what we have to do with the whole playing, we have to build that up. And then those pieces, the Noda and then the Lacour thing, they are good pieces to start with, and then of course you need a good guide to tell you how to do it.
Right.
Because it is a motorical thing.
Mm-hmm. One more question. Oh, and we had someone also contribute the Lonbeck's Hello, Mr. Sax, or Parameters of the Saxophone is another good resource for that. For this is from Antoinette Van Couteren. She asks, how do you handle performance anxiety, or do you have any tips for handling performance anxiety?
Yeah, well, that's a good one also. I have had, of course, moments that it affected me, and I can, for me, one of the most important things is, of course, it has to do with the personality of the person, and it, that's why it's very difficult to say just one thing, but that could be applicable for the whole world. I would have to see or to know how people are, how they play, how their playing is related. I don't know how to say that. You know, if, for instance, if you don't have good fundamentals, if you have a problem with your air support, then usually people have getting hyperventilation when they play. So first of all, that this is very important to have good fundamentals, um, and and then it's really also, I think, a very important point of it. I think it's nothing new what I say. Just be very well prepared, so that it doesn't feel like the Mount Everest anymore, but maybe like a flat country as Holland, you know. And I think that a lot can be done by visualization. So if you feel that you are insecure about something that you have to do, I think it helps a lot to go through the moment that you have to do it, maybe a few days before already, and just put yourself in the situation mentally. Then when you're finally doing it, it is like you already know what will go on, and how it will go.
Mhm.
And also, it's really has to do with your basic trust in yourself and in how how perfectionist you are. And if you can allow yourself to make a mistake, if you're not allowing yourself to make a mistake, you can then you might have a lot of trouble with anxiety. But when you can still look in a mirror and say, okay, I'm good, I'm okay, you know, then it's maybe less tricky to have this.
Mm.
But
Yeah,
it depends on the person.
sure.
For
Yeah.
myself, when I'm well prepared and when I feel that physically I'm good and that I have a good read, you know, all these things. Yeah, this is very important. Right?
Yeah.
And that the people around you that you're playing together, that they are positive, and that you know that the whole sounds, you know, all these things they help. Mhm. But it's also something to build up. Is maybe you might have a bit of anxiety in the beginning of the career, and you have to get over it by doing it.
Right. Yeah, I find that the other thing is just as you just ended with is, you know, forcing yourself to do it, having the experience of dealing with it and getting through it, you know, will give you that trust and that confidence and that permission, you know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
as you said. So, well, thank you so much. That was the final question that was typed in. It really wonderful to visit with you and hear your thoughts on all this. Thank you for your
Thank you.
time.
It was great. I like to talk.
Yeah. Well, me too.
So thanks everybody for being there. It was super.
Yeah.
The yeah, my former student Yo-Yo Su. I'm not sure if you know him.
Hmm.
He asked me today if I would like to make publicity for my CD, which of course I want. This is the
Yeah.
one with Bach, and Yo-Yo has I think something like 10 copies. Where he's in the United States at the moment. He's studying with Kenneth Tse in Iowa University.
Hmm.
And if people are interested, he is willing to sell. He's kind of he's my dealer in the United
Right.
States.
Absolutely. All right. Everybody reach out to Yo-Yo then.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Take care.